Free will is not something that we are born with. It is something that we earn through strength of deliberation. I find that my prior belief in determinism acted as nothing but self-sabotage, whereby I continued to engage in harmful behavior because I decided that my personality and the follow-through thereof that consisted of my actions was something that was completely outside of my control. But I realize now that it was nothing more than evidence of a weak will that did not want to change for the better. I come to find that if we are in a state of perpetual interrogation, where we become vigilant to our thoughts as they arise, and to our emotions, and to the very propellants that try to make us follow through with certain behaviors, we find that we do have the ability to show restraint. And anything that tries to convince you otherwise is nothing more than evidence of a will that is too weak to realize that it was free all along. And the longer we keep telling ourselves that we don't have free will, the longer we will be in bondage towards the adversary of this archonic enslavement system. When thoughts arise, rather than identified with them, we could simply interrogate them. When emotions arise that are usually the byproduct of thoughts, we have the ability to interrogate, and then we question, is this thought my own? Is this emotion my own? Is this behavior my own? Do I really want to do this? And upon being lucid enough where you can constantly be an observer and don't identify and interrogate everything, you are able to differentiate that which is truly of spirit and that which is of the adversary, which is completely foreign to your nature, but because we are in a spiritual war, it wants you to behave like an animal. It wants you to believe that you do not have a choice as to the things you do and who you are, and you cannot change. So the very things that make you commit wrongdoings and self-harm, and therefore makes you suffer and makes other people suffer, which is bad enough, the biggest lie, as far as that's concerned, is the fact that the adversary convinced you that this is who you are and you cannot change. And sometimes people even become self-righteous and they say that this is who I am. And I love myself for who I am. But here's the thing, right? If you practice lucidity, which is the vigilance of not identifying but rather constantly interrogating, you must ask the question, does this thought reflect who I am? Does this emotion and does this behavior that begins as a temptation or an inclination but not an inevitability, before you do that very thing that you know is damaging, you have to first realize that it was only brought about by way of thought and feeling. But if you take a step back and you just become an observer of what arises in your own consciousness, you're able to laugh in the devil's face because you realize that it was nothing more than some kind of a externality that has nothing to do with you as the incarnational individuation in the flesh, but it has everything to do with the flesh itself, which belongs to a universal kind of animalistic will that all humans have in common. And we also have this in common with the animals. And then once we view our own mind like an obnoxious television that is way too loud, and we view our emotions as electricity that is not ours but belongs to somebody else, we're able to just observe. And then we realize that I have the ability of deliberation. And how this works is, let's say you have the emotion that arises that tries to tell you to drink alcohol or smoke weed or eat Twinkies or go to a certain party to confront somebody who's at the party who is talking shit about you, and you want to go put him in his place and embarrass him in front of all of your friends and all of his friends, okay? These things first arise as a inclination or a certain, quote, will. But once you realize that the pluralized will that afflicts us is nothing more than the false self, you're able to just observe thoughts, feelings that arise and not follow through with them because you have restraint. And instead, you can deliberate and you can actually perform, if your will is strong enough, your true will, the exact polar opposite. You could say, I am not going to drink this alcohol, but rather I am going to make myself a glass of water and go read a spiritual book and meditate for 30 minutes instead of engaging in that harmful behavior. And you find that, wow, I was actually able to show restraint. And when something damaging arose, I was able to do something to counteract it. Okay? It's the same if you're like stuck in traffic and something pisses you off, and then you feel the emotion, and then you tap into it. And then you're like, do I really want to honk my horn, roll down the window, and tell this person to fuck off? Or do I want to just turn on some classical music and enjoy my favorite pianist, Frederick Chopin? And then you realize that you were able to do that. And then it's like, okay, well, why are they telling us that we don't have free will? Yes, I admit that there is a false will that dominates most people and they're a slave to it, and they've been deceived into believing that that's who they truly are, but really they're just a slave to the flesh. They're a slave to the adversary that enslaves them. That's all that is. Once you see the devil for who it truly is, and you realize that it's something that is both external, but more importantly, your own worst enemy is the one that's internal. And once you have reached that type of hyper vigilant lucidity where you're constantly interrogating everything that arises, and you come to the conclusion that it has nothing to do with the true will of pure spirit, you're able to essentially just temporarily be afflicted with temptations. But if you use deliberation, you can show restraint from acting upon the temptations, and you can also show deliberation to do the polar opposite of what the negative inclination is once you realize that it's not you. What is you is the man or woman who wants to be a good person, who wants to not suffer and aid people who do suffer in the pursuit of happiness through purity as opposed to impurity, as a compassionist as opposed to somebody who is sadistic. This is why we have a conscience. Whenever we feel ashamed of ourselves upon acting upon something, and we think, I could have done otherwise, so why didn't I? What continues that negative behavior of the weak will, which is subordinate to the true will, the reason why it continues to get away with tyrannizing you on a daily basis is because you have convinced yourself that I cannot change and that's who I am, and I need to learn to accept that. And then history is going to continue to repeat itself, and you're going to be in a state that is zombified, and the animalistic flesh is just going to continue to engage in the 7 deadly sins, and you're going to be in agonizing pain because of it, and you're going to go into a extreme depression, because ultimately this false self is so miserable that it ultimately itself wants to die, and it wants to terminate your actual physical body. That's why most people, when they let the false self take control and the true will has been the thing that's just dragged along and trampled underfoot by all of the disgusting things that this world has to offer, you come to realize that the reason why we feel depressed and we want to unalive ourselves is because the false self is so miserable, because it's completely divorced from all divinity, that by it dying is actually an act of mercy. And this could often lead to actually killing the body, because that's exactly what the Matrix wants to do. It wants to put the artificial self, which is demiurgic in nature, to be front and center. And that way, as a symptom of being spiritually dead, where the true will is not able to act, but it's the malicious will that continues to act in its stead and convinces you that that's who you really are and you can't change, and you need to learn to, quote, self-love or accept yourself for the individual that you are. See, I come to realize that that's why so many of us are depressed and even want to unalive ourselves. Because when we're dealing with something that is divorced from divinity, it is therefore evil, and it is therefore mortal and artificial. And because it's an abomination and it never should have existed in the first place, it has no choice but to suffer and want to end its suffering by making you depressed eventually to the point where you would take your own life. But I'm here to tell you that I have found that to be unnecessary. You're actually able to kill the false self by seeing it as the demon that it truly is. And you're able to be in a state where you have mustered enough strength and courage to actually take control of your fucking life. And that is the beautiful news that I have to offer, is that if there's any aspect of yourself that you dislike, that is only a symptom of your spirit protesting that it is not that it is merely occupying the body, but it's not animating the body. Imagine such a terrible situation where you as a spirit are not able to actually control your body, but you're merely occupying something that is acting like an animal and acting in automaticity towards things that cause you to suffer, cause the people around you to suffer. Don't you want your suffering to stop? Don't you want to stop inflicting suffering on others? See, what you do is you realize that you do have free will. But if it doesn't seem that way, it's only because your will has been made weak by the tyranny of the false self. And you do this by being in a constant state of meditative awareness, where lucidity observes everything thoroughly, almost as if it's from the outside looking in. And it interrogates every thought, every emotion, every inclination, and it asks the question, is this who I am? And the question as to how you know if it's really you is you ask your innermost, is this intrusive thought who I am? And of course the answer is no. You would say, I do not want to have these thoughts. This horrible way that I feel, is this an aspect of my true self? The question is, do you consent? Do you want to feel that way? And if the answer is no, then it has nothing to do with you. So once you realize that, you have to have enough strength of will to start to deliberate things that are in the opposite direction of where the adversary is trying to take you. And once you find that you're able to constantly do that in rebellion towards the bondage of the false self, you find that that is actual liberation. If you feel like mindlessly scrolling brain rot content, instead say to yourself, I am going to listen to an audiobook that pertains to gnosis. And even though it's going to be difficult, because your adversary has been in control of your body for so long that it has seemingly set up shop and it has no plan on leaving. But if you have a will that's strong enough and you're able to take these inclinations, because the only thing the intrusive thought is trying to get you to do that brings about the intrusive emotion is to try to lead to an action that is and of itself is the whole modus operandi of the grand intrusion itself. Thoughts, feelings, and actions. It starts with the intrusive thoughts. Then it starts with the intrusive emotion, because it wants to lead you to the intrusive action, and it's intrusive because it's intruding on your true spiritual will that wants nothing to do with that behavior. So I have come to find for myself that I cannot control my thoughts. I would say 90% of my thoughts at best have nothing to do with anything that I would consent to. And they are purely demonic or superficial at best. And I look upon that pettiness and I see it for what it is. The same with the emotions and the inclinations. And even though I find that oftentimes I can't control my emotions and I can't control my thoughts, I have learned that if I have the ability to deliberate contrary-wise, I have proven to myself that I do have free will, because I am a spiritual being occupying a body, and I can make the body do what I want it to do. And before, when I felt that I couldn't, it's only because the adversary had me by the balls. It had its arm so far up my ass that it was literally using me as a puppet. I was a slave to alcoholism. I was a slave to gluttony. I was a slave to engaging in all kinds of distasteful activities. And now that I realize that when it comes to the inclination, it is only a temptation. And when I realize that I'm able to, with an act of my will, say, no, I am a spiritual being that is occupying a body. I am going to occupy my body and fully control it and do something that is completely contrary to this, something that I know that in theory I would like to do, so I better make it be also in practice as well. You have to have full autonomy on a spiritual level of your body, both in theory and practice. And even though unless you reach a certain monk-like state, you find that you're like me, and all of your thoughts are intrusive, all of your emotions are intrusive, and you have these extremely strong inclinations to do the wrong thing, to do the spiritually detrimental thing. You have to realize that this is just the hatred of the adversary that is against you. It's one thing to say that you hate the adversary, but it's another thing not to realize that that person who claims to hate the adversary has, for the most part, been you all along. You have been controlled by the malicious alien will that has quite literally, demonically possessed you, and you thought that you didn't have a choice. But it takes a great deal of strength to be able to interrogate every thought and feeling and inclination that arises, and then to have the lucidity to view it and not identify with it, and you recognize that it's not your true will, and you go and you ask yourself, what is my true will? Well, it's obviously the opposite of what the adversary tells me to do, so you go and do the opposite. I find that when the adversary tells me to eat unhealthy food, I will punish my enemy by starving it. If my adversary tells me to be lustful towards women and towards images in my mind or on a computer screen, I will be in alignment with chastity. If I feel angry towards somebody, I will just feel into the anger, and with every fiber of my being, I will show the strength to show restraint and not act upon that anger, and just feel it, because I realize that when I would just act automatically. I thought that I didn't have a choice, but I realize now that I always had a choice. And if you feel that you don't have a choice, it's only symptomatic of lack of the free will that is of your true self. It is only symptomatic of somebody who is not lucid, and that's why they want you to drink. So you wake up the next day and you're hungover, and because you're in a state of debilitation, it makes it much easier for the adversary to control you like a puppet. I find that when it comes to all of the 7 deadly sins with an act of deliberation, even though the temptation arises, you have the ability to do the very opposite. And then you can actually, what seems like forcing yourself to do something that is contrary to your behavior up until that point. But once you find that it is possible and you can continuously deliberate on the things that is in alignment with your true will, you find that even though it feels like you're forcing yourself to, quote, do the right thing, it will eventually become habitual. And once it becomes habitual, it just feels natural to actually be in alignment with your true will. And then you realize, wow, I am a spiritual being that is not only occupying this body, but I am controlling this body. It is my vehicle, and I can do with it what I will. And the adversary is going to try to tyrannize you and molest your consciousness with every type of profanity that will arise in your mind in disgusting emotions. And they're going to come on really strong. But if you don't identify with it and you show restraint, you realize that I could feel every type of horrible emotionality that is entirely destructive and the thought that corresponds with it, but yet I do not have to act upon anything that I don't want to do. I can, in point of fact, do the opposite. I can be sober. I could be fasted. I could be chaste. And I can be a nice person. And I could make it an effort rather than to be selfish, to be good. And I feel now that I'm actually able to control my life. And I realized before, when I thought I didn't have any control because I lacked the possibility of free will to begin with, it was only the fact that my will was weak. And the belief that I could not change was the number one self-sabotage. And the belief that the adversary was who I truly was also self-sabotage. Now I realize that what I truly am is the intentionality that wants to catapult my body towards love, truth, freedom, beauty, and morality. I realize that I'm able to wake up in the morning and actually have a routine that is based upon the things that I know are ultimately good. I could say, I could read Gnostic scriptures for 5 hours a day, and then I could go to the gym, and then I could go see my family members and give them my loving kindness and enjoy their company. And I'm able to wake up in the morning and meditate upon how I want my day to be. And I can deliberate upon that. Therefore, I have free will. Free will is something that is not a given. It has to be earned with an act of strength. And I have earned that. And any time I fall from grace, I get back up, I dust myself off, and I tell myself I won't let it happen again, and it will take practice. But once you discover who you truly are, you realize that you can be just that. And anything else that's contrary-wise to that, you just observe it as the alien intruder that it is. And you witness the inclination as it arises, and you do not act upon it. You just feel into the emotion, you observe the thoughts, and you do the diametrically opposed opposite. And you will find that you will be much happier in so doing. And you will feel a sense of confidence in your ability to conduct yourself as you want to in this world. Determinism is a lie. The idea that your life is scripted is a lie. When it comes to your true will, you are able to be the incarnation of just that. And I find that you mainly do that by negations and renunciations of the things that arise, which is the majority of your behavior, if not all of your behavior, perhaps right now, and you just negate them and renunciate them. And then rather than suffering in the agony of just wallowing in that black cloud of the adversary, you realize, wait a minute, I can take 15 steps forward and I can count every step, and then take 15 steps backwards and count every step. And it's almost like, wow, it's kind of like when my true will is completely aware that it's able to control the body, regardless of all of these alien intrusions that afflict me. It's kind of like playing a video game and you imagine a metaphorical controller in your hand, and you are pressing the buttons and you are moving the analog sticks, and you're like, wow, I can go anywhere I want. I can do anything I want to do. And it was like there was some archonic extraterrestrial that was literally playing your physical body like a video game that you had no control over. You remember how miserable it was before? Remember how miserable it was when you were a teenager and you had to watch your older sibling play video games and you knew that he was a dick and he wasn't going to give you a turn, and you were just sitting down and watching him play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, or watching him play some kind of a story mode first-person shooter, and you really wanted to play, but he would never give you a turn, and you would just sit down and just watch him. That's the analogy of literally what the adversary is doing to you. It is controlling your physical body like it's a video game for his enjoyment. But the truth of the matter is, the adversary is actually a non-entity. It's actually entirely a delusion, and it is because it has always been divorced from spirit and divorced from divinity. It actually is suffering incarnate. It is the epitome of suffering. And that's why it leaves you feeling depressed. That's why it leaves you feeling like you want to unalive yourself, and it makes you get that feeling like, this is not who I am. This is not the way I want my life to be. Why is this happening? It's because the adversary is using the controller to play your physical body. That's the truth. But once you kill the enemy, take the controller from his hands, and you realize that now you're playing your own game and you're doing your thing, the things that you want to do that are in alignment with who you truly are on a primordial, eternal level, then all your adversary can do is watch you play your own game and try to do everything in its power to convince you to give him the controller back. And when you constantly refuse to do so, it has no choice but to just taunt you. He taunts you with the thoughts in your head, taunts you with the emotions that you don't want to feel, and telling you, hey, you should play the game this way. Instead of going that way, why don't you just go the fucking opposite direction? Like a backseat driver trying to give you lessons on how you should drive and where you should go. And then you just laugh in its face. Shut up, backseat driver. I'm in control. And once that happens, you are as free as you can possibly be given the limitations of this physical world.